Nadia Voss did not look like someone who asked for help. That was the first thing people noticed about her. The second was the way she moved through a room. Not fast, not loud, but with a kind of weight that made other people step aside without quite knowing why. She was 34 years old and had been named Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Structural Group 8 months ago, the youngest person to hold that title in the company's 31-year history. The week she got the offer, she had driven home in silence, sat in her car in the parking garage for 11 minutes, and then gone upstairs and made dinner like nothing had happened. She did not tell anyone she had been waiting for that call for 6 years. That Tuesday started the way hard weeks always start, not with a single disaster but with a slow accumulation of small ones. Her regular driver, a steady man named Phil, who had worked with the company for 9 years, had called in with a family emergency. Her backup was in the shop. Her assistant, Cora, no, wait. Her assistant's name was Jess, and Jess had found a solution by 8:15 in the morning, which was why Nadia kept her. "There's a certified contractor through the fleet service," Jess said, setting a coffee on Nadia's desk without being asked. "He's cleared, background checked, former military, his rating's clean, fine," Nadia said, without looking up from the permit review she was already 3 pages into. She did not ask his name. The man who pulled up to the Meridian building at 8:47 drove a dark gray sedan that was 9 years old and immaculate. Not clean the way rental cars are clean. Clean the way something is when the person who owns it cares about it and has the skill to maintain it. The tires were properly inflated. The wiper blades were new. There was a small photograph tucked into the corner of the dashboard, just barely visible from the outside. A girl, maybe 7 or 8, missing a front tooth, laughing at something off camera. His name was Leonard Briggs. Not the Leonard anyone would have looked at twice on a job site, or in a waiting room, or standing in line at a grocery store. He was 41, average height, with the kind of build that came from actual work rather than a gym. Broad through the shoulders, hands that showed it. He wore a gray collared shirt, no logo. He had a slight scar along his left jawline that he'd had so long he forgot it was there. He got out of the car when Nadia came through the lobby doors, not because the protocol required it, but because he had been raised a certain way and the habit was too old to break. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, assessing, brief, moving on. "Meridian Fleet," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She got in the back seat. He drove. The first thing Leonard noticed was that she didn't talk on the phone the entire way to the Hartwell site. Every executive he had ever driven had been on a call within the first 2 minutes. Nadia Voss sat with a manila folder open on her lap and read through it with a pen in her hand, making small marks in the margin, and the silence in the car was not the silence of someone being rude. It was the silence of someone who was somewhere else in their mind and was not going to pretend otherwise. The second thing he noticed was the folder, not its contents. He wasn't looking. But the tab on the side was labeled 48C, and the header he caught in the rearview mirror when she turned a page was a subcontractor compliance audit. He had seen that format before. Specifically, he had seen irregularities in that format before, in a different city, in a context he was not going to think about right now, because he was driving a stranger to a work site, and it was none of his business. He kept his eyes on the road. "Take the service entrance," she said, without looking up. He had already planned to. The main gate would have been backed up by the concrete delivery. He'd seen the trucks 2 blocks back. He said nothing and turned left. She looked up from the folder, just briefly, and then looked back down. The Hartwell building was a 40-story commercial development that was 8 months behind schedule and had gone through 2 contractors. Nadia was not there to be charmed. She walked the site with a project engineer named Derek, who was 46 and nervous in the specific way that people are nervous when they know something is wrong and are hoping no one will notice. She noticed. She always noticed. "The column spacing on levels 12 through 15, she said, pointing at the blueprints laid across the hood of a site vehicle. "We had to adjust for the, I can see what you adjusted for. I'm asking why the load transfer calculations weren't resubmitted when you did. Derek looked at his tablet. Derek looked at the blueprints. Derek looked at the sky. That's a question that needs an answer today, Nadia said, not a gesture. She was not unkind. She was simply not willing to participate in the performance of not knowing things that she knew. Leonard stayed with the car. That was the job. But the site was small enough, and the conversation was close enough that he heard most of it, and he watched without appearing to watch. An old habit, useful in too many contexts to name. What he noticed: the project engineer was nervous, yes, but the nervousness had a shape. It was not the nervousness of someone who had made a mistake. It was the nervousness of someone who had been told to make a mistake and was now standing in front of the person who was going to find it. That was a different thing entirely. On the drive back, she was on the phone, just once. 12 minutes, a conversation about bond timelines that Leonard understood better than he would have been expected to, and then she was back in the folder. You went to the service entrance, she said, when they were 6 blocks from Meridian. Yes, I didn't tell you to. No. How did you know to? Leonard kept his eyes on the road. Concrete delivery on Harmon, it would have backed up the main gate. A pause. You noticed the trucks, I noticed things. She didn't say anything else, but she looked at him in the rearview mirror for a moment longer than she had before, and then she went back to her folder, and he drove the rest of the way in silence. That evening, Leonard picked up his daughter from his neighbor's house 3 blocks over. Her name was Clem, short for Clementine, and she was 8 years old and had very strong opinions about everything, which he had encouraged and was now occasionally paying the price for. Mrs. Fowler said I was being argumentative. Clem told him on the walk home. Were you? I was being correct. There's a difference. He did not argue with this because he agreed with it, and because he was tired, and because the way she said it sounded exactly like her mother, and he was not ready for that feeling right now. He made dinner, pasta, the one with the sausage she liked, and listened to her describe a disagreement she'd had with a classmate about whether a bridge built wrong could look right, and he said it usually couldn't, not to someone who knew what to look for. She told him he was being argumentative. He laughed. It was the first time he had laughed all day. After she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and thought about the compliance folder and the project engineer's particular brand of nervous, and the way the load calculations had been altered in a way that was subtle enough to pass a quick review and wrong enough to matter in 10 years. Or 5. Or sooner, depending. He thought about it for a while. Then he put it away and went to bed. Wednesday, Jess called the fleet service again. Nadia had 3 site visits and a 7 a.m. board call, and her regular driver was still unavailable. Leonard pulled up at 7:58. He did not say good morning. She did not say good morning. She got in, he drove, and somewhere around the 3rd block she said, without looking up. Same contractor fleet service sent the same one, yes. Fine, she said. That was apparently that. The first site was routine. The second was not. They were 40 minutes into the visit, at a mid-rise in the warehouse district, when Leonard, standing by the car, saw something that made him still in the way that certain men go still when something is wrong, not tense, not alarmed, just very, very quiet. A man had been watching the site entrance for 22 minutes, not a worker, not a city inspector. His clothes said civilian, but his stillness said something else. Something Leonard recognized the way you recognize a word in a language you haven't spoken in years. He did not approach the man. He noted the license plate of the vehicle parked 2 spots back. He noted the time. He noted which direction the man was facing. When Nadia came back to the car, Leonard said, "How long has this site had a security concern?" She stopped. "What?" "There's a man who's been running surveillance on this entrance for at least 20 minutes. Vehicles, registered, I'd guess, to a holding company that won't trace back to anything useful in the first search." She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she had not done before, not the quick assessment of someone cataloging information, but the slower look of someone recalibrating. How do you know what surveillance looks like? She said. Same way you know what a bad load calculation looks like, Leonard said. You look at enough of them. She did not ask him to explain, not then. She made 2 phone calls in the car on the way back, quietly, and her voice had changed, still controlled, but with something underneath it that Leonard recognized as the specific kind of careful that people use when they are frightened and will not show it. He said nothing. It wasn't his place. But when he pulled up to Meridian and she started to get out, she paused. Tomorrow, she said. Same time, I'll be here, Leonard said. She went inside. Thursday was the day it became something else. She was in a meeting when Jess called Leonard and told him the afternoon visit to the Caldwell substation had been moved up by 2 hours. Leonard was already in the area. He confirmed and drove over. The Caldwell substation was not a glamorous place. A low industrial facility that managed power distribution for 3 of Meridian's largest builds. Nadia was meeting with the facilities manager when Leonard pulled into the lot and immediately noticed that her car, the vehicle she had arrived in with the alternate driver, was parked at an angle that no one parks at unless they stopped suddenly. The alternate driver was leaning against it, on his phone, relaxed. Leonard parked, walked around the vehicle. He crouched down on the driver's side. The brake line had been partially severed, not cut clean, that would have been obvious, scored carefully so that it would hold under normal conditions and fail under pressure, under the kind of pressure that comes from a sudden stop, or a fast corner, or a vehicle that needed to brake hard and fast. Leonard stood up. He looked at the alternate driver. How long have you been with the fleet service? He said. The man looked up from his phone. What? How long have you been with the fleet service? 3 years. Why? Leonard looked at him for a long moment. You're going to want to call this in. Call what in? Step away from the vehicle, Leonard said, and call your dispatcher. Something in his voice was different then. Not loud, not aggressive, just absolutely certain, in the way that certain people are certain. Not because they think they're right, but because they know they are, and have been in enough situations where being wrong had real consequences that they stopped taking chances with it. The alternate driver stepped away from the vehicle. Leonard called Jess. The next 40 minutes were not comfortable for anyone. A security team arrived, a mechanic arrived, 2 police officers arrived. Nadia came out of the building mid-meeting and stood in the parking lot in the flat afternoon light and looked at the scored brake line and then looked at Leonard. You found this, she said. I checked the vehicle when I arrived. Why? He thought about how to answer that. Because yesterday didn't feel finished, he said. She looked at him for a long time. Who are you? She said. Not rudely, not even particularly quietly, just directly, the way she said most things, as if she had decided that the space between a question and its answer was not a place she was willing to stay in longer than necessary. My name is Leonard Briggs, he said. I'm a certified mechanic and structural safety contractor. I was a safety investigator for the National Transportation Systems Board for 9 years before I left to take care of my daughter. The air was very still. Your daughter, Nadia said. She's 8. Her mother died 3 years ago. I work fleet contracts because the hours are flexible. Nadia looked down at the brake line, still exposed, still telling its story. The compliance folder, she said. On Tuesday. You recognized the format. I've seen that specific audit template used to obscure materials substitution before. On a bridge project in Galveston. I was part of the investigative team that pulled it apart. Why didn't you say something? Leonard looked at her steadily. You didn't ask me, and I wasn't sure. I'm more sure now. The name that came up, that Nadia's security team surfaced, that the police began to trace, that Leonard had quietly suspected since he'd seen the project engineer's particular brand of nervous, was Randolph Kane. Randolph Kane was the primary investor in a subcontracting firm that had been awarded 3 of Meridian's most recent builds. He was 61 years old, patient, and had spent the better part of a decade building a business model that worked by cutting material costs by amounts small enough to be dismissed and large enough to matter, and then hiding the difference in audit documentation that was designed to confuse rather than deceive outright. Nadia had been getting close. She had not known she was getting close, but she had been, in the way that thorough people get close to things, not by looking for them, but by looking at everything with the same level of attention and eventually finding the thing that didn't fit. Randolph Kane had known it before she did. The surveillance on the site entrance, the scored brake line, the nervous project engineer who had been told to adjust calculations and now had to stand in front of the person who would find them. It had not been random. None of it had been random. That evening, Nadia sat in her office long after the building had gone quiet. The city was still doing what cities do, moving, breathing, lit from below, and she sat with the audit folder open in front of her and went through it again, this time knowing what she was looking for. Her phone buzzed, a message from a number she didn't recognize. Page 7, the materials specification line, third column, line 14, compared to the original submitted proposal on file from March. She pulled up the proposal. She found it in 30 seconds. She sat very still for a moment. Then she typed back, "How long have you known?" The reply came after a pause. "I suspected Tuesday, confirmed today when I saw who was watching the site. You recognized him. I recognized what he was doing. I looked him up after." She set the phone down, picked it up again. "Why are you still helping me?" This pause was longer, because I looked at what's in that folder, and I know what happens if those buildings go up wrong. I've seen what happens, and I have a daughter who's going to live in this city for the rest of her life. Nadia read that twice. She did not have a response that felt adequate, so she said the only true thing she could find, "Thank you." What came next was not fast. Things like this are never fast. There were attorneys, and there were auditors, and there were long meetings in rooms with too many people and not enough windows. Randolph Kane did not go quietly. Men like him rarely do, and the paper trail was exactly as complicated as it was designed to be. But it was there. It had always been there. That is the thing about documentation designed to obscure. It still has to document. And when someone who knows what they're looking for decides to look, it tends to tell the truth eventually. Leonard was asked to consult formally. He said yes, on the condition that his hours were structured around school pickup. The attorney asking looked briefly surprised and then wrote it down. Nadia did not make a habit of trusting people. This was not something she was ashamed of. It was, she had decided long ago, simply accurate. She had been disappointed enough times, and early enough, to understand that trust was not something you gave because someone seemed trustworthy. It was something you built out of evidence, over time, the same way you built anything that was meant to hold weight. Leonard Briggs was evidence-based. She could work with that. The first time she met Clem, it was accidental. Nadia had stopped by the consultation office on a Thursday afternoon, and Leonard was on a call in the hallway, and Clem was in the corner of the waiting room with a book that she was very pointedly reading, and Nadia sat down 2 chairs away and waited. Clem looked up from the book, looked at Nadia, looked back at the book. Then she said without preamble, "What do you do?" "I run a construction company," Nadia said. "Do you build things or do you make sure things are built right?" Nadia looked at her. "Both, ideally. Right now mostly the second one." Clem considered this. "My dad does the second one too," she said. "He says most people only care about the first one until something falls down." "He's right," Nadia said. Clem seemed to find this acceptable. She went back to her book. Leonard came back into the room and saw the two of them sitting there in the particular quiet of two people who have just finished saying something real to each other, and he looked at his daughter and then at Nadia, and something in his expression shifted. Not a big shift, just a small one. The kind that happens when something you were not expecting turns out to be something good. The case against Randolph Kane took 7 months to build properly. He was removed from the 3 active projects in week 2. By week 6, 2 of his associated companies had been referred for independent audit. By month 4, a materials supplier in Ohio who had been waiting, who had been waiting, it turned out, for almost 2 years, came forward with invoices that had been falsified and said so clearly and on record. The buildings stood. They would stand for a long time. The corrections were made, which was the point, which had always been the point, not to punish, but to fix, to ensure that the people who would live and work inside those walls would be safe in ways they would never have to think about. Nadia thought about that sometimes, how the most important work is the work that succeeds invisibly, the bridge that holds, the floor that doesn't give, the brake line that has never been touched. On a Friday evening in November, Leonard was sitting at the kitchen table, helping Clem with a math assignment that had gotten more complicated than expected when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Answered. "I wanted to tell you before it's public," Nadia said. "The final audit came through this afternoon. All 3 builds are approved. The corrections are on record. It's done." Leonard was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. "I also wanted to say." She paused, in the way that Nadia Voss paused when she was choosing words carefully, which was different from most people's pauses, because it was not uncertainty but precision. "I wanted to say that I was wrong about what I thought that week, when I didn't ask your name. I was treating you like a function and not a person, and I was wrong, and I don't do that anymore, or I try not to." Leonard looked across the table at Clem, who was frowning at a fraction problem with the focused intensity she brought to all obstacles, large and small. "You were busy," he said. "People are busy. That's not an excuse." "No," he agreed, "but it's a reason. There's a difference, a pause, then something that might, in someone less controlled, have been a quiet laugh." "Your daughter," Nadia said. "She told me most people only care about building things until something falls down. She says things like that. Daddy, she's right." "I know." The city outside the window was doing what it does in November, getting dark earlier, lights coming on in all the buildings, all those floors built by someone's hands, held up by someone's calculations, trusted in the way you trust a thing you've never had reason to doubt. Leonard looked at his daughter's frowning face, her pencil moving across the page, working at the problem, because that was what you did with problems. You worked at them until they gave up their answer. "Thank you for calling," he said. "Thank you for finding the brake line," Nadia said, "and the folder, and the surveillance and the Ohio Supplier connection." "And you would have found it," Leonard said. "You were already looking." "Maybe," she said, "but I might not have looked fast enough." He didn't argue with that. It was probably true. After he hung up, Clem looked up from her worksheet. "Was that the building lady?" "Yes." "Is the bad guy in trouble?" "Yes." Clem nodded, apparently satisfied, and looked back at her fractions. "Good," she said, in the same tone she used when a math answer came out right. Not surprised, just settled. Like the world had, on this particular occasion, done the thing it was supposed to do. Leonard picked up his pencil and helped her with the next problem. Outside, the city held itself up the way cities do, on 10,000 decisions made correctly, on work done right by people nobody thought to look at twice, on the quiet, load-bearing fact of things built to last.